The wrench slips from my fingers, clattering against concrete that's absorbed 30 years of honest sweat. I never thought a $7 part would change everything. But when you're a single dad choosing between your daughter's dinner and keeping the lights on, every decision becomes a test of who you really are. They say 73% of small businesses fail within the first decade. What they don't tell you is that some of us keep fighting long after we should have quit, not because we're stubborn, but because we're fathers. My name is Leo Martinez, and this is the story of how fixing a stranger's car taught me that sometimes the biggest repairs happen to broken hearts, not broken engines. Before we dive into this journey, I want to know, have you ever had a moment where doing the right thing felt like the hardest choice? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And if you love stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We share inspiring stories like this every week, and your support means everything to us. The afternoon sun filtered through dust-covered windows of Martinez Motors, casting golden streaks across a garage that told the story of its owner. Every tool in its place, every surface worn smooth by decades of caring hands. Leo Martinez stood at his workbench, his calloused fingers gentle as he explained a simple brake repair to Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who'd been bringing her ancient Honda to his father's shop since before Leo was born. "It's just the pads, Mrs. Rodriguez," Leo said, his voice carrying the patience of a man who understood that cars weren't just metal and machinery to people like her. They were lifelines. "Nothing scary. I'll have you back on the road by tomorrow morning." Relief washed over the woman's weathered face. "Dios mío, I thought it would cost hundreds." "My grandson said." "Your grandson means well," Leo interrupted gently, "but he doesn't know your car like I do. $45 for the parts, $25 for the labor. That's it." In the corner of the garage, 8-year-old Lily Martinez sat cross-legged at a paint-chipped desk that Leo had cut down to her size. Crayons scattered around her like rainbow confetti as she worked on her latest masterpiece, a drawing of their garage with "Daddy Fixes Everything" written in purple letters across the top. Her tongue peeked out slightly in concentration, the same expression she'd inherited from her mother. The shrill ring of the phone shattered the peaceful moment. Leo glanced at the caller ID and felt his stomach tighten. "Third notice." Final warning flashed on the small screen. "Lily, keep coloring, Mija," he said softly, then answered with forced steadiness. "Martinez Motors." "Mr. Martinez, this is Patricia from Southwest Collection Services. We've sent 3 notices regarding your outstanding balance of—" "I know exactly what I owe," Leo said, turning slightly away from both his customer and his daughter. "And I know exactly when I'll pay it. The 15th, just like I told you last week." Mrs. Rodriguez pretended not to hear, busying herself with her purse, but her kind eyes reflected the understanding of someone who'd lived through her own share of hard months. "Mr. Martinez, we need immediate payment or we'll be forced to—" "15th," Leo repeated firmly, then ended the call. He turned back to Mrs. Rodriguez with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sorry about that. So, tomorrow morning work for you?" As the elderly woman left with promises to return early, Leo leaned against his workbench and allowed himself one moment of quiet desperation. The walls of the garage seemed to close in. Every unpaid bill, every sleepless night, every choice. Between groceries and gasoline pressing down on his shoulders. "Daddy." Lily's small voice broke through his thoughts. She held up her drawing, her dark eyes bright with pride. "Do you like it?" Leo crossed to her desk and knelt down, studying the crayon masterpiece with the seriousness it deserved. In her innocent artwork, their struggling garage looked like a palace, complete with smiling cars and a stick-figure daddy with impossibly large hands. "It's perfect, baby girl," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Just like you." Outside, the distant rumble of a diesel engine grew louder, but neither father nor daughter paid it any attention. They were too busy living in Lily's crayon world, where daddies could fix anything and love was enough to pay the bills. The rumble grew deafening as a flatbed tow truck rounded the corner, its diesel engine coughing black smoke into the clear afternoon air. Leo stepped outside, Lily's hand instinctively finding his as they watched the massive vehicle maneuver into their narrow driveway. What came off that truck defied logic. A Ferrari 458 Italia, fire engine red and gleaming despite Its apparent breakdown sat like a ruby dropped in a coal bin. The car was worth more than Leo's garage, his house, and probably his entire neighborhood combined. Holy hell, muttered Jake, the tow truck driver, as he activated the hydraulic lift. Thing died on Highway 10. Engine just cut out, no warning. Owner's assistant here nearly had a heart attack. A woman stepped out of the passenger side, her movements quick and agitated. She wore faded jeans and a wrinkled blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Everything about her screamed frazzled employee dealing with her boss's expensive problem. "Are you the mechanic?" she asked Leo, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Please tell me you can help. Mr. Vance is going to fire me if this isn't fixed by tonight. He's flying in from Tokyo, and this is supposed to pick him up at the airport." Leo studied the woman's face. Genuine distress mixed with the kind of exhaustion that came from working for demanding people. He'd seen that look before on other assistants who'd stumbled into his garage with their employer's automotive emergencies. "I can take a look," Leo said carefully. "But ma'am, this is a $250,000 car. You might want to call Ferrari directly, or I tried everyone," she interrupted, pulling out her phone to show him a list of rejected calls. "It's Sunday evening. Nobody's open. The dealership's automated system just keeps transferring me." Her voice cracked slightly. "Please. I know this isn't your usual clientele, but I'm desperate." Jake snorted as he finished lowering the Ferrari. "Lady, no offense, but your boss should have bought American. These Italian cars are all flash, no substance. But it needs a whole new engine." He climbed back into his truck. "Good luck, Leo. You're gonna need it." As Jake drove away, Leo walked slowly around the Ferrari. Despite its predicament, the car was magnificent. Every curve purposeful, every surface reflecting the dying light like liquid metal. "Daddy, it looks like a racing car from my coloring book," Lily whispered in awe. "It does, doesn't it?" Leo smiled, then turned to the woman. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she said quickly. "Sarah Johnson. I'm Mr. Vance's personal assistant." Leo popped the hood and immediately knew something was off. The engine bay was too clean, too perfect. No dust, no wear patterns, no evidence of actual road use. But he kept that observation to himself. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said, running his hands along the engine block. Sarah watched from a respectful distance, her arms crossed. "We were cruising at about 70. Everything was fine. Then suddenly all the dashboard lights came on and the engine just died. No stuttering, no warning sounds. Just dead." Leo closed his eyes and placed his ear near the ignition system. This was how his father had taught him. Listen to the machine, feel its rhythms, understand its language. Modern diagnostics relied on computers, but computers couldn't hear the subtle symphony of a properly tuned engine or sense the vibrations that spoke of deeper problems. After several minutes of careful examination, his fingers found it. A tiny electronic relay in the ignition control module, nestled between two larger components. To most mechanics, it would be invisible. To Leo, it sang of wrongness. "Got it," he said, straightening up. Sarah's performance slipped for just a moment. Her eyes sharpened with genuine interest rather than anxious desperation. "That quickly. Sometimes the hardest problems have the simplest solutions," Leo said, pulling out the faulty relay. "This little guy controls the timing sequence for your ignition system. When it fails, everything shuts down to protect the engine." He held up the relay, no bigger than his thumb. "The weird thing is, this is a brand new part. High-grade components don't usually fail this fast unless..." He paused, studying it more closely. "Unless what?" Sarah asked, stepping closer. "Unless they're designed to." Leo installed the replacement relay with practiced efficiency, his movements precise and economical. The Ferrari roared to life on the first turn of the key, its engine purring with the satisfaction of proper repair. Sarah's relief appeared genuine, though Leo caught her watching him with an intensity that seemed beyond a grateful assistant. "Thank God. What do I owe you?" This was the moment Leo had been dreading. He could ask for anything. A desperate assistant with a wealthy boss would pay almost any price to avoid unemployment. The ethical thing would be to contact other Ferrari specialists, get quotes, charge accordingly for such specialized work. But as he looked at this woman's tired face, thinking about her fear of losing her job, he couldn't do it. "The relay cost $7, Leo said quietly. I spent about an hour diagnosing the problem, but the actual fix took 5 minutes. Let's call it an even $100. Sarah stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. That's it. The last mechanic we called wanted 5,000 just to tow it to his shop. The last mechanic was trying to sell you a new engine, Leo said with a slight smile. I'm just trying to fix your car. It's what my dad taught me. Do honest work, charge fair prices, sleep well at night. From the garage doorway, Lily appeared with her latest creation, a crayon drawing of the red Ferrari with a huge smiling face and the words Happy CR written across the top in her careful 8-year-old script. Here, she said shyly, offering the drawing to Sarah. For your boss. So he knows his car is happy now. Sarah knelt down to accept the drawing, her fingers trembling slightly as she took it. For the briefest moment, her corporate mask cracked completely, revealing something vulnerable and deeply moved. Thank you, she whispered to Lily, then looked up at Leo. Both of you. This means more than you know. As she drove away in the purring Ferrari, Leo couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just participated in something much more significant than a simple repair. The woman's eyes had held secrets, and her relief had seemed less about keeping a job and more about finding something she'd been searching for. He just didn't know what. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made impossible things seem inevitable. Leo was underneath Mrs. Rodriguez's Honda, wrestling with a stubborn brake line, when the sound of expensive German engineering purred to a stop outside his garage. Through the gap beneath the car, he could see polished black shoes clicking against pristine pavement, the kind of shoes that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. These weren't the scuffed boots of his usual customers or the practical flats of working mothers dropping off family vehicles. Daddy, there's a fancy lady here, Lily called from her corner desk, her voice carrying the innocent fascination children have with anything that sparkles. Leo slid out from beneath the Honda, wiping his hands on his coveralls, and stepped into the morning light. The woman standing beside a gleaming black town car bore no resemblance to the frazzled assistant from yesterday. This version of Sarah Johnson wore authority like a second skin, a charcoal power suit that probably cost more than Leo's monthly rent, hairstyled in a perfect chignon, posture that commanded boardrooms and bent lesser mortals to her will, but the eyes were the same. Sharp, intelligent, measuring. Good morning, Mr. Martinez, she said, her voice carrying none of yesterday's desperate edge. I believe we need to have a more honest conversation. Leo's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Insurance? Fraud investigation? Some kind of setup? Had he unknowingly repaired a stolen vehicle? My name is Serafina Vance, she continued, extending a manicured hand. I'm the CEO of Vance Motors. You may have heard of us. The wrench slipped from Leo's suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering against the concrete with a sound that seemed to echo forever. Vance Motors wasn't just a car company. It was an empire. Fortune 500. Global operations. The kind of corporation that existed in a stratosphere so far above his world that he'd never imagined breathing the same air as its leadership. The Ferrari, he said slowly, understanding flooding through him like ice water. It wasn't really broken. Oh, it was broken, Serafina assured him. Very deliberately broken. That relay failure was engineered specifically to test diagnostic capability. What I didn't engineer was your response to it. She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the oil-stained concrete. Mr. Martinez, I've spent the last 6 months searching for someone with a very specific combination of skills. Technical brilliance, yes, but more importantly, uncompromising. Integrity. Do you know how many mechanics I've tested with that Ferrari? Leo shook his head, still reeling. 47, she said. 47 shops across 5 states. Every single one tried to sell me thousands of dollars in unnecessary repairs. Some quoted engine replacements. One quoted a full transmission rebuild. You charged me $100 to fix a $7 problem. Lily had abandoned her coloring and now stood pressed against Leo's leg, staring up at this powerful woman with undisguised curiosity. Are you a princess? She asked with 8-year-old directness. Serafina's corporate mask slipped for a moment, revealing something softer. No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who builds cars. Like my daddy fixes them. Exactly. Like your daddy fixes them. Serafina knelt down to Lily's eye level. In fact, I'd like your daddy to come work with me, building the next generation of cars. Would you like that? Quick pause here. Can you guess what Leo's going to say? This is the moment that changes everything. Drop your prediction in the comments. Are you team take the risk or team stay safe? Let me know your thoughts. Leo's practical mind kicked into overdrive. Ms. Vance, I appreciate the offer, but I think there's been some misunderstanding. I run a small neighborhood garage. I fix brake pads and change oil. I don't have an engineering degree or Mr. Martinez, Serafina interrupted, standing gracefully. Yesterday, you diagnosed a complex electronic failure that stumped our own engineering team for 3 days. You did it by listening to the engine, by using instincts that no computer diagnostic system can replicate. That kind of intuitive mechanical intelligence can't be taught in any university. She gestured toward the town car, where a driver waited patiently. I'm offering you the position of Director of Practical Innovation at Advanced Motors. You'll head a new division focused on real-world problem solving, bridging the gap between theoretical engineering and practical application. The salary is $150,000 annually, plus benefits, plus performance bonuses. The number hit Leo like a physical blow. He'd never seen that much money in his entire life, let alone in a single year. Think about it, Serafina said softly, glancing at Lily. Think about what this could mean for your daughter's future. As the town car pulled away, Leo stood in his garage doorway, watching a $250,000 opportunity disappear down his street. Lily tugged on his coveralls. Daddy, are we going to build cars with the princess? Leo looked down at his daughter, at her bright eyes and boundless faith in his abilities, and made a decision that would change both their lives. Forever. Yeah, baby girl, he said quietly. I think we are. 3 weeks later, Leo stood outside the Vance Motors corporate headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that scraped the sky like a monument to human ambition. Lily squeezed his hand, her backpack filled with coloring books and crayons, ready for her first day at the company's on-site childcare facility. It's really big, Daddy, she whispered, craning her neck to see the top. Yeah, it is, Leo agreed, straightening the tie he'd bought specifically for this moment. The suit felt foreign on his frame, like wearing someone else's skin. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by the whispered conversations of perfectly groomed executives who looked like they'd been born wearing ties and speaking in acronyms. The boardroom was a cathedral of corporate power, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views, a conference table that could seat 20, walls lined with awards and patents that represented decades of innovation. Leo felt like an ant who'd wandered into a palace. Julian Croft occupied the head of the table like a king holding court. Everything about him screamed Ivy League pedigree. The perfectly knotted Harvard tie, the Swiss watch, the kind of confident posture that came from never having to worry about making rent. He was flanked by a dozen engineers, all carrying tablets and wearing expressions of barely concealed skepticism. Ah, Mr. Martinez, Julian said, not bothering to stand. Our new Director of Practical Innovation. Please, enlighten us with your revolutionary insights. The condescension in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. Leo recognized the tone. He'd heard it before from customers who assumed that working with his hands meant working without his brain. Well, Leo began, moving to the front of the room. I've been looking at your battery cooling system designs, and I think there might be some opportunities for improvement. He pulled out a hand-drawn sketch, crude compared to the CAD drawings these people were used to, but clear in its logic. The current system uses a complex network of pumps and sensors to circulate coolant, but it's over-engineered. Think of it like plumbing in a house. Plumbing. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the lead thermal engineer, interrupted with barely concealed disgust. We're discussing advanced thermal management systems, not bathroom fixtures. Several engineers chuckled. Julian leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. Leo pressed on, his face reddening. The principle is the same. Water finds the most efficient path. Instead of forcing circulation through predetermined routes, we could design passive flow channels that naturally direct coolant to the hottest areas. Do you have any data to support this theory? Asked Michael Zhang, the systems integration specialist. Thermal modeling? Computational fluid dynamics analysis. I don't need computer models to know that heat rises and cold sinks, Leo said, frustration creeping into his voice. Basic physics doesn't change just because you put it in a fancy presentation. The room erupted in polite but dismissive laughter. Julian stood, his smile widening. Mr. Martinez, I think what our colleagues are trying to say is that we operate on a different level here. We use data-driven methodologies and proven theoretical frameworks. Your intuitive approach might work for fixing old pickup trucks, but we're developing next-generation electric vehicles. Leo felt the heat of embarrassment rise in his cheeks. Every face in the room reflected the same judgment. He was out of his depth, a pretender in a world where credentials mattered more than common sense. Perhaps, Julian continued with theatrical generosity, you'd be more comfortable in our manufacturing division. They always need skilled technicians to implement the designs we create here. The suggestion hung in the air like an insult wrapped in false kindness. Leo gathered his sketches, his hands shaking slightly with suppressed anger and humiliation. I'll consider that, he said quietly, and walked out of the room to the sound of resumed conversation. As if his presence had been nothing more than an amusing interruption that in the sterile depths of Vance Motors' server facility. Julian Croft moved through rows of humming machines with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where the bodies were buried, because he'd put them there himself. The tech assistant, Kevin Marsh, was exactly the kind of employee Julian preferred. Competent enough to be useful, ambitious enough to be bought, and moral enough to have sleepless nights. About it later. Kevin's fingers hovered uncertainly over the keyboard as Julian's instructions became increasingly clear. You're asking me to alter simulation parameters, Kevin said, his voice barely above a whisper. This could sabotage months of work. I'm asking you to correct an oversight, Julian replied smoothly. Mr. Martinez's cooling system design hasn't been properly stress-tested. We're simply ensuring that any flaws are discovered now, in simulation, rather than later in real-world application. Think of it as quality control. On the wall of monitors surrounding them, Leo's project files glowed with innocent vulnerability. Thermal coefficients, flow rate calculations, pressure tolerance specifications. All the mathematical DNA of his practical innovation laid bare for Julian's surgical manipulation. If we adjust the thermal load parameters by 15%, Julian continued, leaning over Kevin's shoulder, we can simulate the kind of extreme conditions the system might face in desert climates. Surely that's responsible engineering. Kevin's mouse cursor hovered over the critical values. 15% didn't sound like much. It sounded reasonable, even prudent. But both men knew that engineering margins existed for precise reasons. And 15% beyond design specifications would turn Leo's elegant solution into a catastrophic failure. Mr. Croft, if this gets traced back, it won't, Julian assured him. And even if it did, we're simply being thorough. No one can fault us for comprehensive testing. Kevin made the changes with the mechanical precision of someone trying not to think about consequences. On the screens, Leo's cooling system, a design born from years of practical experience and intuitive understanding, was quietly poisoned with failure. 3 hours later, Leo stood in his new lab, staring at simulation results that made no sense. His cooling system, which should have performed beautifully, was showing catastrophic overheating in the computer models. Pumps were burning out, sensors were failing, the entire elegant dance of thermal management was collapsing into chaos. This can't be right, he muttered, running the simulation again. Same results. The computer was telling him that his lifetime of experience was wrong, that his father's teachings were insufficient, that his intuition was worthless, he stayed. In the lab until midnight, running test after test, each failure cutting deeper into his confidence. By the time he finally went home to Lily, doubt had taken root in the spaces where certainty used to live, the executive floors of Vance Motors. Emptied after 6 p.m., leaving behind the hushed whisper of climate control systems and the distant hum of security patrols. But 42 floors below ground, in the company's prototype development facility, warm lights still glowed from the windows of Leo's lab. Serafina found him there at nearly midnight, hunched over a workbench covered in sketches and component parts, looking like a man trying to solve an impossible equation. She'd changed out of her business suit into jeans and a simple sweater, armor shed for authenticity. Rough day? She asked, settling onto a stool beside his workspace. Leo looked up, surprised. In the harsh fluorescent light of corporate hallways, Serafina was all sharp angles and executive presence. But here, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of tools and prototypes, she looked younger, more human. The simulations aren't matching my expectations, he admitted, gesturing at the computer screen showing his latest failed test. Maybe Julian was right. Maybe I'm out of my depth here. Or maybe the simulations are wrong. Computer models don't lie. No, Serafina agreed. But they can be manipulated. Data is only as honest as the people who input it. She picked up one of his hand-drawn sketches, a cooling system design that looked more like art than engineering, with flowing lines that seemed to dance across the page. Tell me about this. Not the technical specifications. Tell me why it works. Leo's hands moved instinctively to the sketch, tracing the pathways he'd drawn. When I was 8, my dad took me to see the old aqueducts outside the city. Roman engineering, built 2,000 years ago. No computers, no pumps, no complex control systems. Just stone channels that understood gravity and flow. His voice grew stronger as he spoke. The Romans knew that water wants to move. It finds the path of least resistance, flows around obstacles, seeks its own level. They worked with those natural tendencies instead of fighting them. And your cooling system does the same thing. Exactly. Instead of forcing coolant through predetermined routes with pumps and sensors, I'm creating channels that naturally guide the flow to where it's needed most. When a battery cell heats up, thermal expansion creates pressure differentials that draw cooling fluid automatically. It's self-regulating, elegant, simple. Serafina studied his face as he spoke, seeing the quiet passion that animated his features. This wasn't the frustrated man from the boardroom or the uncertain engineer battling simulation failures. This was someone who understood machines at a molecular level, who could see solutions that escaped computer models. My father used to say that the best engineering feels like magic to everyone except the engineer, she said softly. He started this company in a garage much smaller than the one I found you in. Leo looked up, curious. What was he like? Brilliant. Demanding. He could take apart an engine blindfolded and put it back together better than it was before. Her voice carried the weight of old grief. He died 5 years ago. Heart attack in this very building. Working late on a prototype that was supposed to revolutionize electric vehicle efficiency. I'm sorry. The worst part is, I think I'm failing him. This company was his life's work, and I've let it become corporate, political. We're so busy protecting our market position that we've forgotten how to innovate. Leo set down his pencil, really looking at her for the first time. Beneath the CEO composure, he recognized something familiar. The weight of trying to honor a parent's memory while forging your own path. My wife Elena died 3 years ago, he said quietly. Cancer. She was the one who encouraged me to go to engineering school, who believed I could be more than just my father's son fixing cars in the family garage. What happened? Life happened. Bills, medical expenses, a daughter who needed her father more than the world needed another engineer. He managed a sad smile. Elena used to say that love isn't about the dreams you give up, it's about finding new dreams worth fighting for. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who understood the complicated mathematics of sacrifice and responsibility. Have you ever had to choose between your dreams and your responsibilities? Leo's story hits differently when you realize how many of us have been there. Share your story in the comments. Sometimes the path we don't choose ends up leading us exactly where we need to be. Why the test? Leo asked finally. With the Ferrari. I mean, why not just hire through normal channels? Serafina's laugh was bitter. Because normal channels gave me Julian Croft. Harvard MBA, impeccable references, 15 years of corporate experience, and absolutely no understanding of what actually makes cars work. He can manage a quarterly budget review, but he couldn't diagnose a dead battery if his life depended on it. He's not that bad. Leo, he once suggested we could improve fuel efficiency by making the gas tank smaller. Despite everything, Leo laughed. Seriously? Dead serious. In a room full of engineers. No one corrected him because he's their boss. She stood, brushing dust off her jeans. That's when I realized the company my father built was dying from the inside out. We needed someone who understood cars the way he did, not as quarterly profit centers, but as machines that have to work for real people in the real world. And you thought that someone was me? I hoped it was you. The jury's still out. As she walked toward the door, Leo called after her. The simulations will work eventually. I just need to figure out what I'm missing. Serafina paused at the threshold. Or you need to figure out who's making sure you don't find it. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Leo alone with his doubts and the growing suspicion that his biggest problem wasn't computer code. It was corporate sabotage. The Detroit International Auto Show was the Super Bowl of the automotive industry, where manufacturers spent millions creating exhibitions that would define their brands for the coming year. Vance Motors had spared no expense on their showcase, a gleaming pavilion of glass and chrome that housed 12 prototype vehicles representing the future of electric transportation. The Odyssey, their flagship electric sedan, sat in the center. Like a jewel, its midnight blue paint job reflecting the carefully arranged spotlights. Tomorrow morning, automotive journalists from around the world would see it for the first time. Pre-orders were already climbing towards six figures based on leaked specifications alone that in the control room behind the main display, banks of monitors showed every system status, every electrical parameter, every diagnostic readout from the dozen vehicles on display. Leo stood among the technicians, making final adjustments to his cooling system integration, still battling the simulation failures that haunted his every calculation. It was 11:47 p.m. when the first red warning light appeared. Vehicle 7 showing. Thermal alert, called out Marcus Webb, the lead systems technician. Probably a sensor glitch. Within 30 seconds, 3 more vehicles showed similar warnings. Within 2 minutes, every single car in the pavilion was flashing critical alerts. The pristine display dissolved into a chaos of red lights and alarm chimes. "Cut the alarms," Serafina ordered sharply, appearing in the control room still wearing her evening gown from the sponsor's dinner. "What's happening?" "Complete system failure across all vehicles," Marcus reported, his voice tight with panic. "Cooling systems are reading catastrophic overtemperature, battery management is shutting down, engine control modules are going into safe mode." On the main floor, security guards were already cordoning off the display area as smoke began rising. From several vehicles, the acrid smell of overheated electronics filled the air. "Is this Leo's cooling system?" Julian asked, arriving breathless, his usually perfect hair disheveled from running. "I warned you that his unproven modifications could cause cascading failures." "The cooling system is working perfectly," Leo protested, pointing at his diagnostic readings. "Look at the actual sensor data. Temperatures are well within normal range. This isn't a thermal problem." "Then why are all the cooling alerts triggering?" Julian demanded. $40 million worth of prototypes are smoking, and your system is the common denominator." Board members began arriving, hastily dressed. Executives pulled from hotel rooms and late-night dinners, their faces reflecting the magnitude of potential disaster. Stock futures were already dropping in international markets as news of the failure spread through industry networks. "We need to shut everything down," declared Victoria Sterling, the company's chief financial officer. "Cancel tomorrow's presentation, recall all the vehicles, minimize legal exposure. We need to find the root cause first," Leo insisted, moving between monitoring stations. "Something doesn't add up. These failures are too coordinated, too synchronized. Real thermal runaway doesn't happen like this. Maybe in your garage you can afford to guess," Julian snapped. "But this is $40 million of precision engineering. We follow protocols, we minimize risk, we don't gamble on hunches." The argument was interrupted by the arrival of Edgar Thornton, chairman of Vance Motors' board of directors, his presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Situation report," he demanded. Julian stepped forward smoothly. "Complete systems failure triggered by unproven modifications to our thermal management system. I've recommended immediate shutdown and full recall pending investigation." "And what does our director of innovation suggest?" Thornton asked, looking directly at Leo. The room fell silent. Every executive, every board member, every technician waited for Leo's response. His answer would either save $40 million of development investment or condemn him as the architect of the company's greatest engineering disaster. "Give me 4 hours," Leo said quietly. "If I can't find the real cause by 6 a.m., We'll do exactly what Mr. Croft suggests. The emergency board meeting was called for 3 a.m. in Vance Motors' executive conference room, a sterile temple of corporate decision-making where careers lived and died on quarterly projections and risk assessments. The city sparkled beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, oblivious to the crisis unfolding 42 floors above street level. Leo sat at the far end of the conference table, still wearing his grease-stained work clothes, a stark contrast to the suits and ties surrounding him. His hair was disheveled from hours of diagnostic work, his hands bearing fresh cuts from wrestling with stubborn electrical connections. "The situation is clear," Julian announced, standing at the head of the table with the confidence of someone delivering a practice presentation. "We're facing a complete systems failure directly attributable to unproven modifications. Every vehicle shows identical thermal management alerts, all traced to Mr. Martinez's cooling system integration." Edgar Thornton, the board chairman, leaned forward with the predatory focus of a man who'd built his fortune on making hard decisions quickly. "Mr. Croft, what's our exposure here?" "Minimal, if we act decisively," Julian replied smoothly. "We recall all prototype vehicles, blame the failure on experimental technology, and return to proven thermal management systems. The PR narrative writes itself. Responsible corporate oversight preventing potentially dangerous vehicles from reaching consumers." Victoria Sterling consulted her tablet with the grim efficiency of someone calculating disaster. "Marketing has already prepared statement drafts. If we announce the recall before markets open, we can frame this as proactive quality control rather than reactive damage control." "And the financial impact?" Thornton pressed. "40 million in prototype costs, perhaps 60 million in delayed launch schedules. But we avoid potential liability issues and maintain market confidence in our core product lines." Around the table, heads nodded with the synchronized movement of people who'd participated in similar crisis meetings before. This was corporate risk management at its most polished. Identify the problem, quantify the costs, implement the solution, move forward. "Mr. Martinez," Thornton said, finally acknowledging Leo's presence. "Do you have anything to add?" Leo stood slowly, acutely aware that he was about to bet his career, his daughter's future, and his own integrity on an instinct he couldn't prove with data or support with credentials. "The cooling system isn't causing these failures," he said simply. "I've spent the last 4 hours tracing every connection, checking every sensor, analyzing every diagnostic log. The thermal readings are perfect. The problem is somewhere else." "Then explain the alert patterns," Julian challenged. 12 vehicles, identical symptoms, all tied to your modifications. "I can't explain them yet," Leo admitted. "But I know what I'm seeing doesn't match what's actually happening. It's like someone rewrote the software to report problems that don't exist." The suggestion hung in the air like an accusation. Several board members exchanged glances with the kind of meaningful looks that preceded votes of no confidence. "Mr. Martinez," Thornton said with judicial patience, "you're suggesting deliberate sabotage without evidence. That's a serious allegation. I'm suggesting we don't make $40 million decisions based on computer alerts that might be lying to us." Julian's laugh was perfectly calibrated to convey professional dismissal without obvious cruelty. "This is exactly what I warned about when we hired outside our normal recruitment channels. Mr. Martinez has no experience with corporate crisis management, no understanding of fiduciary responsibility, no appreciation for the complexities involved. What I understand," Leo said, his voice growing stronger, "is that good engineering doesn't fail all at once across multiple systems without cause. What I understand is that someone spent a lot of effort making these failures look like my fault." He pulled out his phone, showing diagnostic screenshots he'd captured during his investigation. "Look at the timestamp patterns on these alerts. They triggered in sequence, 30 seconds apart, starting with Vehicle 1 and progressing numerically. Real thermal failures don't follow organizational charts." Serafina, who had remained silent throughout the meeting, suddenly spoke. "Show me, ma'am," Julian interjected smoothly. "I think we're beyond troubleshooting at this point. The board needs to make a decision based on clear risk assessment. Show me the timestamps," Serafina repeated, standing and moving toward Leo. He handed her his phone, their fingers brushing briefly as she took it. Her expression shifted as she studied the data, seeing the same mathematical impossibility that had convinced Leo of deliberate manipulation. "Julian," she said quietly, not looking up from the phone, "walk me through your recommended solution." Again, complete system recall, return to proven technologies, minimize legal exposure through proactive quality control messaging. And who takes responsibility for the failure? Julian's pause was almost imperceptible, but Leo caught it, the momentary calculation of someone checking his exit strategy. Obviously, the experimental modifications would be discontinued, and the personnel responsible would be reassigned to more appropriate roles. The euphemism landed like a blade between Leo's shoulder blades. Reassigned to more appropriate roles. Terminated for cause. Blacklisted from the industry. Serafina set the phone down and walked to the windows, looking out at the city lights while the room waited in tense silence. When she turned back, her expression had transformed from corporate executive to something more elemental, a woman who'd inherited her father's legacy and would not watch it die on her watch. "Here's what we're going to do," she said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "We're going to find out what's really causing these failures. We're going to fix it, and we're going to launch on schedule." Julian's mask slipped slightly. "Ma'am, with respect, the risk," Serafina interrupted, "is that we make decisions based on fear instead of facts." She walked back to the conference table and placed both hands flat on its surface, leaning forward with the intensity of someone betting everything on a single hand. "Leo, you have until 6 a.m. Not to prove your innocence, but to find the truth. Whatever resources you need, whoever you need to wake up, whatever systems you need to access, you have my full authority." The room erupted in carefully modulated protest. Board members invoking fiduciary responsibility, legal counsel demanding risk mitigation strategies, financial officers calculating exposure scenarios. But Serafina's attention remained fixed on Leo, her decision made with the kind of clarity that separated leaders from managers. "Don't let me down," she said quietly. "This is it, the moment of truth. Leo has until 6 a.m. to save his career, the company, and his daughter's future. What would you do in his position? Trust your instincts or play it safe? The next few hours will determine everything. Stay with us to see how this incredible story unfolds." At 4:47 a.m., the Detroit Auto Show floor looked like the aftermath of a technological apocalypse. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across the Vance Motors Pavilion, where 12 prototype vehicles sat silent and dark, their sophisticated systems shut down to prevent further damage. The air still carried the metallic taste of overheated electronics and the acrid smell of thermally stressed components. Leo moved through the maze of vehicles like a detective at a crime scene, his trained hands tracing electrical pathways while his mind processed the impossible mathematics of synchronized failure. He'd eliminated thermal causes, mechanical problems, and software bugs. What remained was either magic or malice. Serafina found him beneath the hood of Vehicle 7, his upper body disappearing into the engine compartment while diagnostic cables snaked around him like electronic ivy. She was still wearing her evening gown from 12 hours earlier, now wrinkled and stained with coffee and nervous sweat. "Anything?" she asked, her voice hoarse from hours of crisis management. "Maybe," Leo's muffled reply came from deep within the engine bay. "Hand me that diagnostic scanner." She passed him the device, watching as he connected it to a control module buried behind the main battery pack. Numbers scrolled across the small screen, voltages, temperatures, system states, all appearing normal. "That's what I don't understand," Leo said, extracting himself from the engine. "Every physical measurement shows perfect operation. Battery temperatures are optimal, cooling flow rates are exactly where they should be, electrical systems are drawing normal power. But the alerts are lies." Leo wiped his hands on his already stained shirt, frustration evident in every movement. "Someone is telling these cars they're broken when they're actually fine." He led her to the central diagnostic station, where banks of monitors displayed system data from all 12 vehicles. The screens painted a picture of catastrophic failure, red alerts, thermal warnings, emergency shutdowns, but Leo had spent hours learning to read between the digital lines. "Watch this," he said, pulling up the raw sensor data from Vehicle 1. The cooling system sensors report normal temperatures, 72 degrees Fahrenheit. But the thermal management software is receiving a signal telling it the temperature is 240 degrees. How is that possible? Someone modified the translation protocols. The sensors are telling the truth, but the software is programmed to lie about what they're saying. Leo's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up diagnostic logs, system, configurations, software revision histories. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in chemical solution, subtle modifications buried in thousands of lines of code, changes designed to trigger false alarms under specific conditions. Here, he said, pointing to a timestamp buried in the revision history. Someone accessed these systems 3 days ago at 2:17 a.m. They uploaded a modified calibration file that corrupts temperature readings. Serafina leaned closer, studying the screen. Can you trace who made the changes? Every login is tracked, Leo said, his voice growing harder. System access requires user authentication, badge scanning, digital signatures. Whoever did this left electronic fingerprints all over the code. He pulled up the access logs, and both of them stared at the username that appeared, Croft_admin, Julian. Croft, Chief Operating Officer, Harvard MBA. The man who'd spent weeks undermining Leo's confidence, questioning his qualifications, positioning himself as the voice of corporate reason while systematically sabotaging the very systems he claimed to protect. Son of a bitch, Serafina breathed. Leo was already moving, his hands working with the focused intensity of someone who finally understood the scope of the problem. I can fix this, but I need to access the master control system. Can you get me into Julian's administrative account? I can do better than that. Serafina pulled out her phone, speed dialing the head of corporate security. Marcus? It's Serafina. I need Julian Croft's access credentials suspended immediately, and I need a full audit of every system he's touched in the past month. While she handled the corporate warfare, Leo dove into the corrupted code with the surgical precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime making broken things work again. The sabotage was sophisticated but ultimately predictable. Julian had the administrative access to modify calibration files, but lacked the practical knowledge to hide his tracks from someone who understood how these systems actually functioned. Got it, Leo announced, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a puzzle finally solved. The malicious code is isolated to the thermal management translation layer. I can write a bypass patch that will restore normal sensor readings. How long? 20 minutes to code it, maybe another hour to test and deploy across all vehicles. Serafina checked her watch, 5:23 a.m. The press conference was scheduled for 8 a.m., with automotive journalists already gathering in hotel lobbies across the city. Do it. Leo's fingers moved across the keyboard with the fluid grace of someone playing a familiar instrument. Code flowed onto the screen, not the elegant abstractions of computer science textbooks, but practical, workmanlike programming designed to solve real problems in the real world that as he worked, Serafina watched the transformation. The frustrated man who'd struggled through board meetings and corporate presentations was gone, replaced by someone operating at the peak of his abilities. This was Leo Martinez in his natural element, doing what he'd been born to do. Testing the first vehicle, Leo announced, uploading his bypass code to Vehicle 1. They held their breath as the system rebooted, diagnostic lights cycling through their startup sequence. Then, one by one, the red alerts began disappearing. Temperature readings returned to normal ranges. Battery management systems resumed normal operation. The acrid smell of overheated electronics began to fade as cooling systems came back online. Vehicle 1 is operational, Leo announced, deploying the fix to the rest of the fleet. By 6:15 a.m., all 12 prototype vehicles were running normally, their systems purring with the quiet satisfaction of proper engineering. The evidence of Julian's sabotage was preserved in digital amber, system logs, access records, code modifications, all bearing his electronic signature like a confession written in ones and zeros. The press conference stage at the Detroit Auto Show represented the culmination of 2 years of development, $40 million of investment, and the professional lives of everyone who'd believed in the vision of next-generation electric vehicles. Automotive journalists from around the world filled the audience, their cameras and questions ready to dissect whatever Vance Motors chose to reveal. Serafina stood at the podium, looking every inch the confident CEO, despite having slept only 2 hours in the past 36. Behind her, the Odyssey gleamed under professionally arranged lighting, its midnight blue paint reflecting the assembled media like a mirror. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying across the crowded auditorium. "Yesterday evening, our prototype vehicles experienced what appeared to be catastrophic systems failures. Today, I want to tell you exactly what happened, why it happened, and what it taught us about the future of this industry." In the wings, Leo watched nervously, still wearing his work clothes, still carrying the smell of electronics and honest labor. Julian Croft was notably absent. He'd been escorted from the building by security at 6:30 a.m., his access credentials revoked, his office sealed pending a full investigation. "The failures were not accidental," Serafina continued, her words causing a ripple of surprise through the media audience. "They were the result of deliberate sabotage by someone within our organization who sought to undermine innovation and preserve the status quo." Camera flashes erupted like lightning as journalists realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. A major corporation publicly acknowledging corporate espionage at the industry's most visible event. "But this story isn't about sabotage," Serafina said, gesturing toward the backstage area. "It's about the kind of problem-solving that built this industry, the kind of hands-on engineering that my father believed in, and the kind of practical innovation that will define our future." She paused, looking directly at Leo. "I'd like you to meet the man who saved our launch, our investment, and quite possibly our company. Leo Martinez, Director of Practical Innovation." Leo emerged from the wings, blinking in the harsh stage lights. Acutely aware of how out of place he looked among the polished executives and media professionals. But Serafina's smile was genuine, her gesture of invitation authentic. "Mr. Martinez," she said as he joined her at the podium, "tell them how you solved the problem." Leo looked out at the sea of faces, cameras, and recording devices, feeling the familiar panic of public speaking. Then he caught sight of Lily in the front row, sitting with other company family members, her face bright with pride as she held up a crayon drawing of him standing next to the Odyssey. "Well," he began, his voice growing stronger, "it wasn't really about computer programming or complex diagnostics. It was about listening to what the cars were trying to tell us." He gestured toward the Odyssey behind them. "When machines are working properly, they have a rhythm, a harmony you can feel if you pay attention. When something's wrong, that harmony breaks down." The challenge wasn't fixing the code. It was learning to hear the difference between what the computers were saying and what was actually happening. "How did you trace the sabotage?" asked Rebecca Martinez from Automotive News. "Every digital system leaves fingerprints," Leo explained. "Whoever modified our software knew how to change calibration files, but they didn't understand the deeper architecture. They left traces in system logs, access records, timestamp patterns that didn't match natural failure modes." "What does this say about the future of automotive technology?" pressed David Chun from Motor Trend. Leo considered the question, thinking about his father's garage, about Elena's faith in his abilities, about Lily's simple belief that Daddy could fix anything. "I think it says we need both," he said finally. "We need the sophisticated diagnostic tools and computer modeling that modern engineering provides. But we also need people who understand machines at a fundamental level, who can hear when something's wrong even when all the data says everything's fine." Serafina stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of corporate authority but softened with genuine emotion. The automotive industry was built by people like Leo Martinez, innovators who combined technical knowledge with practical wisdom, who could envision solutions that existed nowhere except in their imagination and their hands. She gestured toward the assembled media. "Our Odyssey isn't just an electric vehicle. It's a partnership between advanced technology and fundamental engineering principles, between computer-aided design and the kind of intuitive problem-solving that can't be taught in any university." The questions continued for another 20 minutes. Inquiries about production schedules, market positioning, technical specifications, and corporate governance. But the real story had already been told. A single father from a neighborhood garage had saved a Fortune 500 company through the simple application of honest work and practical intelligence as the press conference concluded and journalists dispersed to file their stories, Leo found himself surrounded by industry professionals eager to shake his hand, exchange business cards, and learn more about his innovative cooling system design. For the first time since accepting Serafina's offer, he felt like he belonged in this world. Lily bounded onto the stage, her backpack bouncing, her latest drawing clutched in small hands. "Daddy, you were on TV," she announced with 8-year-old excitement. "Mrs. Peterson from daycare says you're famous now." Leo knelt down, accepting her enthusiastic hug and the crayon portrait she'd created during the press conference. A stick-figure family that included him, her, and a tall woman in a business suit, all standing next to a very colorful car. "What do you think, Mija?" he asked, studying her artwork. "Should we keep building cars with Serafina?" "Yes," Lily declared with absolute certainty. "But can we still color sometimes?" "Always," Leo promised, glancing up to find Serafina watching their interaction with something that looked suspiciously like hope. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain, challenging, but filled with the kind of possibilities that only emerged when practical wisdom met visionary leadership, when integrity encountered opportunity, and when a man brave enough to do the right thing found a woman wise enough to recognize it. 6 months later, Leo stood in the transformed space that had once been Martinez Motors, watching Lily teach Serafina the finer points of crayon technique. The old garage had evolved into something unprecedented, a research and development facility where cutting-edge technology coexisted with the warm familiarity of hand tools and honest work. The Odyssey had launched to critical acclaim, its innovative cooling system earning patents and praise from industry publications. More importantly, it worked, delivering the kind of reliable performance that came from engineering guided by both computer models and practical wisdom. Julian Croft had been quietly released from the company, his departure accompanied by enough legal documentation to ensure his corporate sabotage would follow him to any future employment. His replacement was Maria Santos, a former manufacturing engineer who understood both spreadsheets and socket wrenches. "The secret," Leo told the camera crew documenting their story, "isn't choosing between high-tech and low-tech solutions. It's understanding when to use each one and having the wisdom to know the difference." Serafina looked up from her coloring lesson, Lily's patient instruction having resulted in a surprisingly decent crayon rendering of their combined families. "My father used to say that the best innovations feel inevitable in hindsight, but revolutionary in the moment." Leo's approach to thermal management is exactly that, so fundamentally sound that we wonder why no one thought of it before. As the documentary crew packed their equipment and the last of the interview subjects departed, the three of them settled into the comfortable routine that had become their evening ritual. Homework and coloring at Lily's desk, technical discussions over coffee, the quiet satisfaction of problems solved and challenges met. Leo's story reminds us that success isn't always about having the right credentials or knowing the right people. Sometimes it's about having the courage to do the right thing, even when no one's watching. His journey from struggling single dad to corporate innovator proves that integrity and hard work can still change everything. If this story inspired you, please subscribe to In Stories and hit that notification bell. We share incredible tales of ordinary people achieving extraordinary things every week. Leave a comment telling us about a time when doing the right thing led to unexpected opportunities. Your story might just inspire our next video. Remember, the most powerful innovations often come not from boardrooms or computer labs, but from people who understand that the best solutions combine timeless principles with modern possibilities. Be like Leo, trust your instincts, stand by your values, and never underestimate the power of honest work. Until next time, keep believing that good things happen to good people, especially when they're brave enough to fix what's broken, no matter how big or small.